I'm Leanne Tran, psychologist who's worked with families whose kids don't fit the mould for almost 20 years. I've worked with children for decades, but I know parents are the real change makers when it comes to their kids. Having 3 kids of my own means I know it's not easy. Parent Like a Psychologist is all about simplifying how you support your kids with psychology information filtered through years of experience to take you from overwhelmed to confident. Come on in. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode, Parent Like a Psychologist. This one is a little bit different. It's not necessarily on a particular topic. It's a reflection of some of the conversations I've had with my teenager this week. And for me, it reflected how important it is to be around. This is something that I don't know, I guess I've known throughout, my training as a psychologist, but also the advice that I've been given by many parents that I've looked up to in my parenting journey, that being around when kids need to talk is the way to have them open up and have the conversations with you. Um, and so I wanted to, it's been a big week of conversation for me and my kids, and so thought I could reflect back on some of the types of conversations I've had, because often parents will ask about particular examples, and so this is an episode of examples, I guess, of how I talk with my teenagers, and it's the same way I talk with clients as well, and so it's the same way you can talk with your teenagers. It's all about implementing the skills of effective communication that I learn as a psychologist, but also the ones that I teach in my Chaos to Calm program as well, because having open communication is the key to just making your way through so many of the challenges of childhood and adolescence. I should preface this I nearly said appointment, episode by saying that I always change some of the details. And that's true if I'm talking about a client as well, or if I'm talking about one of my kids. I will weave the different stories in and out so it's not necessarily, it won't be somebody identifiable. Often, if I'm talking to clients, I'll say, I was talking to a kid the other day and they don't know who it was. Was it my kid? Was it a client? On the podcast, I'll talk about, I was having this conversation with a kid or my kid. You don't know if it's mine or if it's a client. And if I'm talking about a client who's got a real interest in something, I've always changed that interest, so that it's not one that people could hear and identify as that particular child. And so just making that clear from the beginning, that's how I kind of make sure that everyone's privacy is maintained. But the 3 conversations I wanted to talk through today were ones about, there were 2 about relationships with other people, and then one about an internal struggle as well, which was really interesting. These conversations weren't planned. They weren't necessarily like deep and meaningfuls, or D&Ms, as I used to call them when I was a teenager. They were just everyday chats that ended up mattering a lot. And it was, the example is the first one. I was folding the washing, um, and my teen walked in and was like just hanging around suspiciously. And I was like, okay, what's up? Um, funny moment too that my kids have said to me before. We've had conversation, and then I'm like, "What else is on your mind?" And they've said, "Oh, you're good at reading people." I'm like, "Yeah, well, it's kind of my whole job, buddy. Thanks for reflecting that I can actually do it." But I think sometimes you know, you can do that as well as a parent. You have that skill, like, you can tell when something's up with your kid. They're just hanging around, and it's like they want to talk about something. And those are the moments where you just, keep going, kept folding the washing, and but then was like, "Yeah, so what's happening? What's on your mind?" Very low key, not necessarily a lot of, direct eye contact, but just like, you know, um giving the signs that I'm open to communication, keep going, let's talk about it. And so that's when this first conversation came up, and it was about how do I say no to a friend without hurting their feelings? And it's this situation of like, my friends asked me to do something, I don't want to do it, but I don't want to hurt their feelings or be rude either. And so that idea of how do I stay true to what I want and who I am while not hurting my friends' feelings is so, whoa, such an in-depth, like it's a great question, right? It's this thing that I know I still struggle with my friends and they do as well. And so we talked about just exactly I guess the first thing I said was, when he said, "How do I say no to a friend without hurting their feelings?" It was, first of all, that it's okay to say no about things. And so we had a conversation about, well, short little snippets about how you don't have to do everything your friends want you to do. It's okay to set boundaries and to say, no, I don't want to do that. And it's okay to make the decisions that feel right to you. That's being kind to yourself. And then as teens, they're balancing that out with how to not be rude about it or hurt their friends' feelings. All teenagers struggle with different things. Some are quite good at just doing what they want and maybe need to swing a little the other way to think about their friends, or some teens just, want to make their friends happy and do everything to please their friends and are losing themselves or not being kind to themselves a little bit along the way. So, um, I talked firstly about how, yeah, it's okay to make decisions that are right for you, and then the other person's response and reaction is their responsibility. You can't be responsible for their feelings. So you can say what you need, and still care about the other person. So you're still being thoughtful, but keeping your boundaries. And so the example was, actually probably, so without going into it in too much detail, it was essentially a chat about balancing people pleasing, and learning to tune into what he really needed and wanted, and how to assertively communicate that stuff with friends so that he could make his position clear, but they wouldn't. He wasn't being rude in the process, not being rude, not being unkind. Um, I think for teenagers, they're still working out their own identity, and so this stuff is a really big deal. To us, it can seem like a little thing, but to teenagers, they're really still trying to work out how to do these things, how to be their own person and to have relationships. Um, so just being there to talk this through and help your teens in like processing it a little bit before they have those conversations is super helpful. Um, I think too the key takeaway is that if you've done it right, you've been kind, you've been upfront, but you've acknowledged their side of things as well, um, then you can be confident that how other people react and how their friends react is on them and it's not your responsibility. So this came to an interesting conclusion. I'll tell you what happened after this. So we had this conversation. Next day, in the car on the way home from school, I was like, "Oh, how did it go with that friend? Did you have that conversation?" And he goes, "Yeah, and guess what? He didn't want to do it either, but like just was going to do it if I wanted to." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So like not a big deal, but they were both in the same position where they would have just gone along with it for the other one's benefit. Um, so yeah, I felt like that was such a positive experience for my teenager and maybe for this other kid as well, who then got an example of how you actually say what you think without trying to hurt someone's feelings, and maybe that, my son's friend felt more empowered to have that own to have that conversation himself with somebody else down the track. So saying no to a friend, that is the first little parent-child conversation I had this week where I dispensed advice while folding the laundry at the same time. Um, and then the next conversation I wanted to highlight was questions around supporting a friend going through a hard time. So this was a conversation that came up at the dinner table later that week. And it was about, what do I say to a friend who's going through something rough? I don't want to say the wrong thing. And this is another great example about how teenagers are becoming their own people and navigating all of these relationships without any experience. And so for most of us as adults, we think about, that it's really hard to know the right thing to say. And that's when we've been having adult relationships for decades sometimes. And when kids are just trying to do it for the first time, imagine how hard it is. Um, but also, this I think it shows too the great emotional awareness that teenagers can have. Um, I was just doing a podcast episode this morning with a guest, and our conversation was about how there is so much more learning about things like um, relationships and emotions at school at the moment, that I think a lot of teenagers have some pretty good skills at being able to have these conversations. Um, and neurodivergent kids as well don't discount how much insight they can have into things like their own identity and the difference between other kids and what they find hard and what they notice. It's sometimes we underestimate the kids in our life, and if you just have the conversation with them and it's patient and calm and you get them to open up, they'll blow you away with their insight, really. Sometimes they'll blow you away with their complete lack of insight, but that's just being a normal teenager. Um, and so in this conversation, we talked about how um, you don't really need you don't need the perfect words. You just need to show up. And so I was telling him that you don't need to help either. You don't always need to fix it. You just need to be there for your friend. So I was, yeah, just being around, being available. The other thing I mentioned too is that it's okay to ask. So it's okay to ask your friend, look, I don't know exactly what to say, but I'm here if you want to talk. Or I know things are rough for you right now. I'd love to help, but I don't know how. What could I do for you? Um, that's more helpful sometimes than trying to fix it, is just showing that you're there for that person and you're happy to have that conversation. And so we talked about just being present, being with somebody and like walking beside them rather than solving the problem for them. I think teenagers often feel the pressure to do things right. They're so unsure about what to do and they don't want to stuff things up. And so letting them know that sometimes these things you can't solve or you don't solve, you're just there for somebody, is really helpful. What I notice is really interesting is that is exactly what I was doing at that time for my teenager. And so sometimes just being there to listen to them is all that they need. They don't need their problems to be fixed. They just need a sounding board or someone to listen to them, or someone to say, "Oh, that sucks. That is so hard. I'm here for you. I will help you with what you need." So it's really interesting that sometimes, I guess what I'm trying to say is we can give our kids' words of wisdom, but we can also just be there for them in the way that um, gives them a template for how to be there for other people. Um, and so then the third conversation I had, are you getting the picture that it was a fairly big week so far? Like some days things, go through with not much challenge, and sometimes you're constantly fielding these things coming from left field to you. And so the next conversation we had was interesting because it wasn't about personal relationships, it was about an internal struggle. And so came to me, this, my team came to me after getting what I considered a pretty good mark on a test. Honestly, nearly perfect, but he was disappointed. Um, and he said, like, I should have done better. The other thing he said next was, how do you deal with being disappointed when it's not good enough or you're not perfect? This is another great example of how teenagers are coming into their own person. And the funny thing is, this can be from someone who's like, at the same time, like, can't solve the problem of, like, there's no wheat bix, which in the morning, like, choose something else for breakfast. So it's the skills and problem solving is just something they need a lot of guidance with. And it's not always at the same level. So you can have these deep moments of insight, and really that's the power of being around, is to latch on to those times of the big questions and being able to guide your kid through them. So in this situation, we talked about self pressure. We talked about how it sneaks in. And I was asking gently, like, where is that pressure coming from? And he thought about it a bit and said, I don't know. He actually said, well, it's not from you, it's not from dad. And so I was like, that's interesting. Where else do you think it might be from? And so eventually worked out that, like, maybe I just don't want to let anybody down. And so it was that deep feeling underneath of just wanting to be enough. And to be worthy, I guess, and self self-confident. So as we unpacked that conversation, it was just me being really curious about where that came from. Um, and that curiosity in terms of, my approach in just being curious about it and interested is what led the conversation to keep going. If I had said to start with, "Oh, that's crazy," it was almost right, like, almost 100%. That is good, like, you don't need to worry about it. They would have shut down the conversation, and we wouldn't have gotten to all those deeper, um, beliefs and things underlying what was happening. So then the things we talked about are that doing your best is enough. I say a lot to my kids that you can't control your achievement, but you can control your effort. And so let's reflect on your effort. Do you think your effort was enough? And he said, yeah. And so then that was a little bit of relief for him. We also talk about how the goal is not perfection, the goal is growth, the goal is learning. It's having a growth mindset as well, of thinking that, you know, um, I didn't get full marks, but I might next time. Um, and I'm not at all saying that I agree with how getting full marks is the be all and end all, but for him, it was about thinking about how you can accept um, the situation for now, but still see room for growth. And for me, it's that it's more about, I think it's important there because comparison is a trap that can lead to always feeling bad if you're comparing yourself to other people or to the 100% mark or goal. That is not a recipe for great mental health. But the idea of that growth mindset and flexibility about things is really positive for mental health. And as part of that, it's about knowing that two things can be true at the same time, which is also part of our conversation. That you did really well and also feel a little disappointed, or feel really proud of how you did and also want to try harder next time. And so it's that flexibility in terms of how to think about things that's really useful in terms of psychology, mental health. So, three really different conversations. One about how to do my own thing and still be kind and keep my friendships. One was about how do I support a friend through a hard time? And then the other one is like, how do I help myself through a hard time when I'm feeling the pressure to be um, perfect or to achieve really highly, which does filter in from places like school and the media and all of that kind of thing. My reflection this week was that none of those moments would have happened if I hadn't been around. Um, for a little point of humor, my husband was saying, "Thank God it was you there, not me," because which is just, a joke. He would have done it well. He would have done it differently, but he wouldn't have done it badly. And so it's not about hovering around and being over, helicoptering. It's not about lecturing either. It's just about being there. And so wherever it is, in the car, in the kitchen, in the laundry, sometimes we think with teenagers that parenting them means taking a step back. And I do agree with that because they do need more freedom, they need more independence. But what they need is us to be just close by and there when they come and seek us out. Um, to be available to them, even when it doesn't seem like they need us. It's just being around and available when they do seek us out is so valuable. So being present is one of the most important parenting tools we have. If you're feeling like your teen is distant, or you're not quite getting it right, just keep showing up for them. You may want to adapt how you engage and maybe make it a bit more laid back. I've heard people say that you kind of need to be like a puppy with little kids, but more like a cat with teenagers. You're not there kind of excited to see them and everything. You're like, "Hey, dude," playing it chill. And I think with that low pressure, really, it will open up them coming to seek you and talk to you when they need it. So just be there, listen when they talk, and keep showing up. Doesn't have to be big. These can be little moments that build on each other over time, and they matter more than you think. So, in the spirit of this, I wanted to say that if this episode has resonated with you, I'd really love for you to share it with another parent who's raising a teen, because it's parenting's lonely. It can be difficult, and I think if there's hearing other people's stories and about the way they have conversations and the types of things that can be helpful, help us all out. So please share it with somebody who's raising a teen, even if you don't think they're struggling with it, even if you think they're doing a fantastic job. Share it with them anyway, so that we can all be doing it together and not feeling so alone. I hope that your week goes well and it's not as full of these random little bombs of big conversation. But if it is, just know that being there, listening, is great. And if you can always come back to it. If you feel like you said the wrong thing, the next day you can always go, yesterday I feel like I didn't say the right thing. I said this, but I'm worried that you took it this way, or you know, it felt a bit mean or patronizing, and this is what I should have said instead. And your teenagers will just respect you more for that. So, um, yeah, good luck with it all. And let me know if you've got particular questions, if you'd love to hear how someone else would handle it. I'm happy to talk you through it. And I'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening to this episode of Parent Like a Psychologist. If you found it helpful, please share on Instagram so other parents can benefit too, and tag me at Leanne Psychology so that I can say a big thank you. Head over to leannetran.com.au to join the village for bite-sized psychology tips straight to your inbox. I really hope this podcast has brought a new perspective and you a step closer towards a calm parent and a thriving child. Have a delightful day.